Your money can double faster than you think. And there's a simple rule that can tell you roughly when it happens. It's called the Rule of 72. You take the number 72 and divide it by your annual rate of return. The answer gives you an estimate of how many years it takes your money to double. At 6%, 72 divided by 6 equals 12 years. At 8%, it's about 9 years. At 10%, it's about 7.2 years. It sounds almost too simple, but this tiny calculation reveals something most people underestimate about investing. Time can be more powerful than the amount you start with. Imagine you have $10,000. At an 8% annual return, the Rule of 72 estimates that it could roughly double to $20,000 in about 9 years. Then, $40,000. Then, $80,000. The first doubling takes years, but once the money gets larger, the growth becomes increasingly noticeable. And that's where compound growth becomes interesting. You're no longer earning returns only on the money you originally invested. You're earning returns on the returns that came before. Your money starts creating more money, and eventually, the growth itself becomes larger than many of your contributions. That's the part people often miss. They think wealth is built by constantly putting more money into an account. Contributions matter, but eventually, the money you've already invested can become the bigger worker.
Now, here's where the Rule of 72 becomes uncomfortable. Because the same mathematics works in reverse. If your money compounds at 8%, it can roughly double every 9 years. But if you carry debt charging 24% annual interest, the Rule of 72 suggests a very different story. 72 divided by 24 is 3. That means, as a rough illustration, money subject to a 24% annual rate can double in about 3 years if the balance compounds at that rate and nothing is paid down. That's why high-interest debt can be so destructive. Your investment account is trying to compound upward, while expensive debt can compound against you. One side is building an asset, the other is building a liability. And suddenly, the question isn't simply, how much can I earn? It's, which direction is compounding working for me?
But there's another lesson hidden inside this rule. Your return matters. Consider two hypothetical investments. One earns 6% annually, the other earns 9%. Using the Rule of 72, 6% means roughly 12 years to double. 9% means roughly 8 years. That's a 4-year difference for just a 3 percentage point difference in the assumed annual return. Over several decades, differences like that can become enormous. But this is where you need to be careful. The Rule of 72 is an estimate, not a promise. Investment returns aren't guaranteed. They don't arrive in a perfectly smooth line every year. A portfolio might gain 1 year, fall the next, and then rise again. The Rule of 72 simply gives you a quick mental shortcut for understanding the effect of a constant annual rate. It is not a prediction of what the market will actually deliver. And that distinction matters, because the goal isn't to find a magical return. It's to understand the mathematics well enough to make better decisions. Here's another reason this rule matters. Inflation also compounds. If prices rise over time, the purchasing power of your money can gradually decline. Using the same shortcut, an average inflation rate of 3% would imply prices roughly doubling over about 24 years. Again, that's an approximation, but it makes the concept much easier to visualize. $1 today doesn't necessarily buy what $1 will buy decades from now. So keeping your money completely stagnant isn't automatically the safest strategy. You also have to consider what happens to its purchasing power. This is why building wealth isn't simply about saving money. It's about understanding what money does while you hold it. And here's the biggest mistake people make with compounding. They wait. They tell themselves, I'll start investing when I earn more. I'll start when I pay everything off. I'll start when life becomes less expensive. But time doesn't wait for your finances to become perfect. If you're 25, you have something an older investor cannot buy back: years. And years give compounding more opportunities to work. This doesn't mean you should ignore emergencies or expensive debt just to invest immediately. It means you shouldn't underestimate the value of starting when you reasonably can, because the earlier your money gets to work, the more time it has to create additional money, which can then create even more money. That's the snowball. And the snowball doesn't look impressive at the beginning. That's why people abandon it. The first few years can feel almost pointless. You contribute, you check the account, nothing dramatic happens. But underneath the surface, the process is already working.
So here's a simple question to ask yourself. If your money could double every 9 years, what would you want your future balance to look like? Because the rule of 72 isn't really about memorizing a formula. It's about changing the way you think about time. Your money has a clock. Your debt has a clock. Inflation has a clock. And every year you wait, those clocks keep moving. The wealthy advantage isn't always knowing some secret investment. Sometimes it's simply understanding what happens when money is given enough time to compound. So remember the formula. 72 divided by the annual rate equals the approximate years to double. Use it as a mental shortcut. Use it to question debt. Use it to understand investment growth. And most importantly, use it to realize that your biggest financial asset may not be your salary. It may be the number of years you give your money to work. Because your money doesn't need to double tomorrow. It just needs enough time and the right direction. Subscribe The Wealth Logic.